Hi guys, hello, welcome to my channel and welcome to the 2024 Book Awards, aka the end of the year book tag. I'm going to be answering the basic questions I think that are typically with this tag, but we're adding a little bit of a twist with the awards this year, which I've seen a couple people do and I thought it was so clever and so cute. Specifically, I took inspiration from these two people. They both did kind of like an award style video, but just Allie kind of did nominees and things like that, which I thought was so fun. With the book tag that I did last year, I don't think I answered a single one of those questions with just one book. So I like the idea of having like nominees and kind of having a winner. As far as like naming the awards, I took inspiration from Katie because she actually named a few of hers kind of in the style of like a yearbook, which I thought was so cute and clever. I'll leave these two ladies' videos linked down in the description if you want to check them out. They were really fun. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started with our very first award. I am literally so excited. This was like so fun to put together. Our very first award is the best dressed, aka the prettiest cover, the coolest cover. And you guys, I bought so many pretty books this year. I'm definitely someone who judges a book by its cover. I purchase a lot of my books depending on their cover. And this is actually the only category where I'm including books that I didn't actually read, but I did buy them this year. The nominees for Best Dressed are Ruby Dixon's Bull Moon Rising. This one has the most fun desk jacket. It also has really pretty sprayed edges. We have a really cool hot pink freaking hardcover. Also, the end papers have really pretty images. This is such a pretty book. And then on that same kind of note, we also have Pride and Prejudice in Space by Alexis Lampley. This one also has just like a really cool colorful cover, but I more so added this one to this category because the actual concept of the book itself, like throughout the entire thing, all the pages are glossy and it just has so many different like colored pages, pictures, and all kinds of stuff in here. And I just think the whole concept of this book is just really fun. And then we have The 13th Child by Erin Craig. And this one almost solely is on this list because of these edges. They're foiled metallic gold. They are so shiny and so pretty. Like I've never seen a more perfectly done edge. But also the hardcover itself has just the prettiest freaking image, and even the spine is super decorated. Like this is covered in foiling, and foiling is one of my favorite decoration elements for a book. Next up we have A Dark and Drowning Tide by Allison Saft. Whoever does the cover art for Allison Saft's books specifically, I think I have like 2 or 3 of her books. They're all absolutely stunning. This one I think is my favorite. I just think this is so haunting and so pretty, and also the fact that the title is in a silver foil. I didn't realize that when I saw it online, so that was just like an extra bonus when I actually got it in person. And then our last and final nominee for Best Dressed is Wolfie by Paisley Hope. This is one that I literally 1000% purchased solely because of this cover. The illustration style is just really cool, but then also the imagery is like, you know, for my spice lovers. We love it. We love to see it. So those are the nominees, and the winner is The 13th Child by Erin Craig. I just can't get over the gold foiling of this book. It is literally the prettiest thing I've ever seen in my life. Moving on to our next category, we have The Underdog, aka a book that needs more hype. These are books that I read that I like just cannot believe more people aren't talking about. And we do have 4 nominees for this category. The first one being the Gold Rush Ranch series by Elsie Silver. This series actually predates Chestnut Springs, and I know Chestnut Springs gets a lot of hype. That one does not need any help. But the Gold Rush Ranch series, I'm so surprised that more people don't talk about it. This one kind of involves more of a horse ranch. The family basically like breeds and trains horses and stuff like that for like racing and, you know, shows and things like that. It had more of that actual like cowboy romance feel versus just a small town romance that I feel like Chestnut Springs really has more of. But then also what I really liked about this series over Chestnut Springs was that the romances were a little bit sweeter. I feel like in Chestnut Springs, some of the dialogue, specifically coming from the male characters, is a little like abrasive. It's a little more, if you were kind of put off by the verbiage of that series, Gold Rush Ranch is more sweeter. It's more lovey-dovey. So again, it's very similar to Chestnut Springs, but has kind of a little bit of a different vibe. And I really liked it, and I'm like so upset that more people don't talk about it. Like no one's reading it. Why? Next up we have the Serpent and Dove series, which is another one that I'm so surprised that no one talks about. It is so good. And I'm honestly to blame for this a little bit as well, because I talk a lot about Kingdom of the Wicked, which is another series I'm absolutely obsessed with. And I do feel like that's another one that was underhyped in my opinion until recently. I feel like more people are starting to kind of get more into it. So that's really exciting for me, and now I need people to get into Serpent and Dove as well, because it is honestly just as good, if not, in my opinion, a little better. Like, I know I sing the praises of Kingdom of the Wicked more often, but that's just because the author is still actively kind of adding to it. The original Kingdom of the Wicked trilogy is done, but she's coming out with a secondary kind of spin-off series involving the other Princes of Hell, which is what that series is about. So new content is still kind of like coming out, whereas Serpent and Dove, I feel like the author is actually also writing a secondary kind of spin-off series. It's a duology, and the second book actually comes out in March, which I'm so freaking excited for. But I just feel like that one doesn't get as much buzz. Like, people aren't really talking about it, specifically that spin-off series, which I ended up loving just as much as Serpent and Dove. Potentially even a little bit more, because it involved vampires, and I was very excited about that. When it comes to a fantasy romance, I love vampires specifically. So that one involved vampires. The original Serpent and Dove is about a witch and a witch hunter, but it goes like so much more beyond that. Like, the first book kind of focuses on that, but the other two books in the trilogy, just, it expands so much. You get so many new characters, and by the end of it, you have this really cool, like, found family kind of vibe that I'm also just so obsessed with. That's probably one of my favorite tropes. I will say a little kind of like disclaimer about this one. It is kind of an older series. The first book came out in like 2019, so 5 years ago. I feel like if it was big at one point and it's kind of died off, I think it needs to be recirculated. Our next nominee for our underdog category is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. And I feel like just generally, Ali Hazelwood as an author does get very hyped up. Like, she doesn't really need help in and of herself, but I feel like this book kind of flopped with a lot of people, and I personally do not understand. I loved this book. It is a little bit different, like it has a little bit of a different tone to a typical romance, but I think that's what I loved about it the most. And then our last one for this category is I Hope This Finds You Well by Natalie Sue. And this one, at its bare bones description, is basically about a woman and her life working in an office, which sounds so boring. That's literally the worst description ever, but trust me, it is so good. She writes like a normal email to a coworker, but at the bottom of it, like after her sign off, she writes kind of like what she would like to actually respond with instead of like the office political version of it. But then she like whites out the text so you can't actually see it, but then she forgets to white out one of the messages and she gets in trouble for it. It's just such a good book, and there is actually a little bit of romance sprinkled in as well, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, I literally have not heard a single other soul that I follow talk about this book, and I feel like that's such a sad thing because it is so good. And drum roll, the winner for the Underdog Award is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Maharan, which I don't know if I said the author before, but it's Shelby Maharan. I feel like a more broader audience would really appreciate this series, so it blows my mind just a little bit more that it's just not talked about. Moving on to our next category, we're going to be getting a little shady. This is the Teacher's Pet Award, aka a book that is just overhyped. We need to stop talking about it. It's not that great. And I'm honestly a little nervous about this category because all the ones that I have for this list are like really beloved books. I feel like I'm gonna upset some of you, and I'm so sorry. This is just my opinion. Also too, though, saying that, none of these are like terrible books. As a matter of fact, most of them I did actually enjoy, just not as much as I was expecting to because of the amount of hype that they get, if that makes sense. The first nominee for our Teacher's Pet Award is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. You guys, the anticipation, or what's the word? I feel like anticipation isn't quite the right word. The expectations that I had for this book going into it were sky high. The main kind of thing that I feel like I've heard about Frida McFadden's writing is how crazy and unpredictable her twists are. And The Housemaid specifically is one that I just feel like gets talked about the most. So when I went into this book, I was just expecting this like life-changing twist. And you guys, I guessed it almost immediately. I feel like with thrillers, if you've watched a lot of thriller and like horror movies, you're gonna be able to guess what's gonna happen. And growing up, I did watch a lot of that kind of stuff. Same with romances. I watched a lot of rom-com movies, so you kind of always know how things are gonna go. Like with The Dead Romantics, a lot of people were like, didn't know how that was gonna go. I knew before I even started the book because I watched a movie that was almost exactly the same. Anyway, regarding specifically The Housemaid, I did enjoy it. I had a good time reading it, but it was a little disappointing because my expectations were like so high. And honestly, I didn't enjoy it enough to continue on with the series. I have no interest in continuing it. Next up we have the Caraval trilogy, which is another one I feel like so many people really, really love. And this is actually a really frustrating series for me because I've read the first 2 books. I have not read finale yet. I feel like I should because I own the book, so I'll probably get to it eventually, but like I just have no interest in continuing the series. I did really enjoy the setting. Like I loved the setting, specifically the first book. And there were a lot of like fun twists and turns in the book. Like if I think back to what happened in the story, it just doesn't make sense to me that I didn't absolutely love it, but I just didn't. I don't know what it was about it, and it upsets me, frankly. And then last, but certainly not least, we have The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. The majority of the people that I follow on BookTube do read mostly romances / fantasy romances, and I feel like this series specifically was one that pretty much everyone that I follow has read. So again, I think I just went into it with like too high expectations because it was so hyped up, and I thought it was okay. The main thing, I felt like it was just too long. Those are some thick books, and I did actually purchase the next 2 in the series. I do feel like the overall plot of those books does sound really fun. It's basically about 3 brothers who need to complete a task to get their inheritance. So each book follows a specific brother and their kind of like task, which involves like a romance. But that first book, I liked it, but it was just kind of, it got boring after a while. Like I was ready for it to be wrapped up like 100 pages or more before it actually ended. So I think the downfall of those books is that they're just so thick, and I feel like in general, Lauren Asher seems to write really thick books. And I have actually started buying the books for her other series that she's currently writing. So hopefully her writing kind of like grows on me a little bit more because we're in real deep with her books. I've got like 4 or 5 of them. And with all of that being said, those are the nominees, and the winner for the Underdog of the Year is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. This is the one out of all of them that had the most visceral reaction right off the bat of like finishing the book. Next up, to kind of lighten the mood, we have the Class Clown Award, and this is basically a book that made me laugh. And I have some really fun nominees for this. I'm very excited about this category. The first one that we have is Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan. This book made me laugh, and just I caught myself smiling so many times when I was reading it, and it was such an addictive book for me. I literally did not want to put it down. I stayed up till 4 a.m. 2 nights in a row. I could not put this down. This is actually a book that I originally was going to put in the Underdog Award because I feel like this book needs so much more hype. I don't really hear anybody talk about it, and it again it's one of my top favorite reads for the year. It was so good. But for each category, I'm trying to like put different books in there, so I'm not talking about like the same 5 books over and over again, you know? Next up, we have Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. This is another one where I audibly was laughing throughout the entirety of the book. It's so cute, it's so fun. Both this one and Long Live Evil have kind of a similar tone. They don't take themselves too seriously. Like the characters just kind of, they're very blasé, and I love it. It's a new vibe that I didn't realize I would like, but I love. Next up for our Class Clown Award, we have Butcher and Blackbird / Leather and Lark. This is the first 2 books in the Ruinous Love trilogy. And these were not ones where I necessarily laughed out loud, but the sense of humor of the author I'm obsessed with. The trigger warning pages in the beginning of the books make me laugh every time. Like I look forward to them. This is an author that I would love to meet in person because she just seems like she'd be a good time. Which, by the way, the author is Bryn Weaver. I don't think I said that. And then our very last one for the Class Clown category is actually a surprise. It's Lore Olympus by Rachel Smith. This is a graphic novel series that I've had the first book of for like the longest time. I finally ended up picking it up a few months ago, and it was fantastic. I never expected a collection of illustrations and a few words to be able to make me laugh. This made me laugh. Although these are like kind of graphic novels, they do have a very adult tone to them, but it is still done in a very cartoony kind of way. Like the jokes and stuff are just very like goofy. Like there's one scene where Persephone is in Hades' house and his dogs are like growling at her, and it's just like a series of images where he's running through his house saying like shit, 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 because his dogs are like gonna attack her, you know? And it just was so fun. I'm not a graphic novel person personally. I've read a couple other ones and they were just kind of like meh, like they were cute, but like not really my vibe. This one I love, and I will continue to collect the books and read the series. With all that being said, the winner for our Class Clown Award is Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan. This one was another award that was so hard to pinpoint a number 1 from, and the only reason this one won over the other books is purely because it was the one that I had the strongest like didn't want this to end kind of feeling with, and also too because it did fit in other categories. I feel like it needed to win something, you know? So here she is. She's the Class Clown. Next category that we have is Most Likely to Disappoint, aka a book that was just disappointing, plain and simple. The first one being Expiration Dates by Rebecca Searle. This one had such a cool sounding plot, but the execution of it just like did not work for me. I think I ended up giving this one like a 3, but looking back is probably like a 2.5 star. Like, it just really did nothing for me, to be quite frank. And then our next 2 nominees are both ones that I feel so sad about. And I definitely am not throwing any kind of shade to the authors of these books because they are some of my auto-buy authors. First one being A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston, or Poston, I'm not sure how to say her last name. I read The Dead Romantics by this author last year and absolutely loved it. And The 7-Year Slip was the very first book that I read this year and I absolutely loved it. So I was so excited for this book, specifically because, again, the plot sounded even better than those other 2 combined. It's basically about a girl who enters accidentally into the small town from her favorite romance series. And actually, that's kind of the same general concept as Long Live Evil. I think the difference is in Long Live Evil, the main character actually became a character in the story, whereas with A Novel Love Story, the town existed, the characters from the books existed, and she was just kind of trespassing through. And because I knew that she wasn't gonna forever be in this story, it was really hard for me to care about the characters and what they were going through because it just, at the end of the day, it wouldn't matter. You know what I mean? So yeah, this one, the idea was really, really cool, but the execution for me just didn't work personally. So I was really, really bummed about this one. That is, again, not gonna stop me from getting every other Ashley Poston book that comes out. There's another one actually coming out next year that I'm very excited for. Don't remember what it's about, but I think it has to do with music or something, but still very excited. And then next up we have The Veiled Kingdom by Holly Renee. And Holly Renee is another author that I read another series from her last year and was completely obsessed with it. I binged the entire thing within a few days. I think it's called The Kingdom of Stars and Shadows or something very similar to that. It's a spicy fantasy romance series. So good. So when I found out she was coming out with another spicy fantasy romance, I was all for it and I was so excited. But unfortunately, it didn't even like not do it for me. Like, the actual plot of the story was fine. And I am going to continue for sure with this series. Like, there was never a point when I was reading where I was like not invested in what was going on. The only thing that really killed this book for me was the actual romance itself. I did a reading vlog with this book and I mentioned in that it felt like, or like I felt bad for the main character. After every spicy encounter, it just made me feel icky for her. Like, I felt bad for her. So it made it really hard to like care or get into, rather, like the romance, which is obviously very important in a fantasy romance. So the first book was a little disappointing in that sense, but I have hopes that the rest of the series will turn things around. The next nominee for our most likely to disappoint is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. I think this was like the 2nd or 3rd book I tried picking up this year. I softy enough'd it. We are now at the end of the year and I've had no desire basically this entire year to pick it up again. So I think at this point it's gonna be a solid like hard DNF. I just don't really care to pick it up. There's like so many other things I want to read. TJ Klune does very like cozy cutesy stories from what I've read so far, which is very limited. I literally just read The Cerulean Sea, which I loved. I loved that book. So I was really excited to kind of like read something else from him. And it did have a similar vibe to the Cerulean Sea book, but I feel like the downfall for this one for me personally was that it is a very cozy read, or like a slower paced read, and I really need to be in a specific mood for that. And I just really haven't been this entire year. Our last and final nominee for most likely to disappoint is Haunting/Hunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. This is one of those books / series that everyone does warn you about. It's a very dark, spicy romance involving kind of like a stalker situation, but I've never really been bothered by a dark romance, and honestly, I wasn't really bothered by this one either. Like, the things that were going on didn't bother me. It was the freaking romance. It's very similar actually to my reaction to The Veiled Kingdom. It was missing that element of care that I need to have. It really was like 2 people that hated each other were doing spicy things and were angry about it. I only got halfway through Hunting Adeline, so I can't really say how that one progresses. I would like to finish that book because I was actually enjoying it, even though I will forewarn you if you're thinking about reading this series. If you're reading Haunting Adeline and you think it's too dark for you, don't even bother going to Hunting Adeline, because it's basically Haunting Adeline times 1,000, like way darker. And I actually got through all of that dark stuff with Hunting Adeline before I quit, but like at the time I had a lot of anxiety things going on. So I feel like reading that, even though it wasn't really bothering me while I was reading, I think it was just like subconsciously not really helping the anxiety. So I had to take a quick break. It was supposed to just be a quick break. It's now been 6 months or something like that. But point being, I would like to finish the series at some point just to kind of like finish the story. But yeah, the romance in Haunting Adeline specifically just did not do it for me. With all of that being said, the winner of our most likely to disappoint award goes to Haunting/Hunting Adeline. The reason this one is winning is because out of all of the books that I talked about, this is the only one where I don't think I'm gonna read anything more from this author. Our next award is The Ugliest Cry. And a little side note, this one is a name that I directly copycatted from Katie's video. I thought it was really clever and cute, so we're reusing it. But this one is basically a book that made me cry. And for this one, I only have 2 books. I am not someone that likes to read sad books, so this year specifically, I avoided them like the plague. I accidentally read a couple of them last year. This year, we were very purposeful in not reading anything that was gonna make me cry. That being said, obviously a couple still slipped through the cracks because they were fantasy romances and I was not expecting them to make me cry. And actually, funny enough, I did vlog both of the reading experiences for both of these books. So if you want to see me cry, I'll leave those videos linked down below. But the first one that we have is Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. The end of this book absolutely ripped my heart out. And then it kind of continued on into Throne of Glass because I did read Assassin's Blade first, which is something that I will die on that hill of. If you're someone that wants to start Throne of Glass and you're wondering if you should read Assassin's Blade first or third, read it first. It is so much more emotional that way. I feel like the other way people say is more emotional. I cannot see how, honestly. What happens at the end of Assassin's Blade carries into Throne of Glass. So every time it's mentioned, it just re-rips out your heart. Whereas if you didn't have that backstory, it wouldn't do anything because you wouldn't know about it. You know what I'm saying? Moving on to our second book, we have Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This is another one where the ending just killed me. I sobbed like a baby at the end of this one as well. And we're just gonna jump straight into the winner of The Ugliest Cry, which is Assassin's Blade / Throne of Glass, because frankly, again, it was kind of like a 2-book combo that just kept reopening the wound, and that is why it's winning. Next category, to again lighten the mood, we have Life of the Party, which is a book that surprised me. So these are just kind of books that I went into with very little expectations and they ended up being pleasantly surprising. The first book that we have is Lights Out by Nevessa Allen. Historically, aka the 2 other stalker romances that I read, didn't do it for me. Again, Haunting Adeline definitely didn't do it for me, but also Crossed from the Never After series. I love that series, just overall. That book specifically, I just didn't really love. It's definitely my least favorite of that series. So going off of that, I was just thinking that stalker romances were like not my thing. But then Lights Out came to be, and I loved every second of it. I think it takes a specific type of character to make stalking not the creepiest thing in the world, you know? Next up we have Slewfoot by Brahm, and this one surprised me because it's very outside of what I typically read. I think it might be considered like historical fantasy, something like that. I've always liked the books that I've read that are historical fantasies, historical fiction, whatever, but for whatever reason, if I hear historical, I'm like, ooh, not gonna like that. But with Slewfoot in particular, we ended up getting this book because it had some really pretty illustrations in it, and Kevin read it last Halloween and really enjoyed it. So I wanted to read it for this Halloween, and you guys, it was so good. The emotions that I felt while I was reading it, specifically the anger, I had to stop several times while I was reading it just to like rant to Kevin about what was going on in the book. But I did enjoy the book overall, and I do feel like there is something to say about an author that can make you feel a certain emotion so passionately. Next up we have Red Rising by Pierce Brown. In this book, honestly, I'm gonna be super unhelpful. Is so hard for me to describe. I don't want to give anything away about the book because I really enjoyed just kind of like learning as I went with it. But also, to be fair, even the back of that book, the synopsis is like half a paragraph and it also is very vague. It's just, there's a lot going on in the book and it's very political, but like in such a good way. I'm not typically a sci-fi reader, but that book was so, so good. That's actually another genre that, to be fair, like every time I've read a book from it, I've really enjoyed the books. But they're very few and far between because I hear sci-fi and I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna like that. But I need to realize that I do actually like sci-fi. So actually maybe that'll be a reading goal for 2025. Read more sci-fi. Moving on, we have A Door in the Dark by Scott Reinteg. This is a book that I very much just randomly picked up on a whim. I had no idea what it was about. I just saw the cover, thought it looked cool. It was Barnes & Noble's like book of the month that month, so I figured why not give it a shot? And I actually ended up really, really enjoying the book, so much so that when the second book came out, I also picked that one up and read it. And yeah, it's just a really fun series. The first one is basically about, again, there's a lot of like political elements to it, or like world building elements rather, that I just like don't want to like spoil, but it's about a girl. They transport kind of Harry Potter style through candles, but something goes wrong when her and a few classmates are trying to like travel home from school, and they end up in the middle of the woods and they have to kind of like survive. Next up we have The Golden Spoon by Jensen Mythen, and this one actually is specifically in this category because I listened to the audiobook for it, and I am not an audiobook girl, but I'm trying to be, and this book is kind of the first audiobook that I was able to like read or listen to all the way through. And I think that was mostly because each character had a different narrator, but also the plot of this book was just really, really fun. If you love the Great British Bake Off, you're gonna love this book. It's a murder mystery involving someone that has died on the set while they're shooting basically the Bake Off show, and it very heavily references very similar things to that show, so it's really, really fun. And then last but not least for our life of the party is Under Lock and Key by Lana Ferguson. I did not see a Loch Ness Monster shifter romance being on my bingo card this year, but here we are. I just finished it a couple of days ago, thoroughly enjoyed it. So those are all of the nominees, and the winner for our Life of the Party award goes to, I'm honestly gonna do a tie between Red Rising and A Door in the Dark. Originally I put Red Rising as my winner, but now that I've like talked about it again, I feel like it should be A Door in the Dark, especially because I really don't hear anyone talk about it. Everyone talks about Red Rising. No one really talks about A Door in the Dark. So that one actually is gonna be the winner. Our next category is Cutest Couple, and this one honestly was the hardest one for me to answer because I don't remember books very well after I read them. Like once I start another one, the one before is gone. I remember like the general plot, but like specific details about the characters or things that they said and things like that, totally gone. So for this one, I only have 3 different nominees. The first one being from a book series that I literally just finished, so it's very fresh in my brain, and that is Rosalina, Caldarian, Farron, Dayton, Ezrin, and Caspian from Beasts of the Briar by Elizabeth Hillen. From that lengthy list of names, you might be able to guess that this is a Why Choose spicy fantasy romance series. The general inspiration for that series is Beauty and the Beast. So you basically have one beauty and 4 or 5 beasts. It was such a good series, and it's still being written. There's another book coming out next year. I think it's the final one. I cannot wait. That was actually another series very similarly to Long Live Evil, where I like just did not want to finish it. I wanted it to go on and on forever. It was so good. And as far as like the actual people involved in the couple, even though it's a lot more than a couple, I just really liked how dynamic the relationships were in general. I'm a really big fan of a Why Choose, because I just find it really interesting having the different relationships. Like not only do the male characters have relationships with the female character, but there's also other relationships within the male characters, kind of like having a found family within a relationship, and that just is the coolest concept to me. Also too, like a random little like side note thing that I thought was really cute is each of the princes in that book have a different nickname for the FMC. So her name again is Rosalina, but each one of them calls her something different. Like one of them's Rosie, we have Petal, Flower. It just is my favorite thing ever. Next up we have Allie and Josh from Lights Out. I also read this one somewhat recently, so it is a little bit fresher in my brain than other books, but this one is still a pretty good example of me not really remembering too much. I have no like specific detail to like give you about why I like them. I just remember that I really liked their banter, and specifically when it comes to Josh, like even when she wasn't around Allie, but just his like inner dialogue, like while he was doing things and doing his stalking and stuff like that, just was cute and endearing in a weird way because again he is stalking her. And then last but not least, this one is actually not like a romantic coupling, but it's basically just the friendships within Long Live Evil, specifically our FMC and 2 male characters. I don't want to spoil anything, so I don't want to say what characters specifically, but the FMC had a friendship with 2 different people, and one of them specifically, like I liked both of them, but one of them specifically was just to die for. I loved every second of it, and that was one of the reasons why I didn't want that book to end. So those are our nominees for Cutest Couple, and our winner is Rosalina, Caldarian, Farron, Dayton, Ezrin, and Caspian from Beasts of the Briar. Yeah, I think it's just the found family vibe of a bunch of people that just I really enjoy. The next category that we have is Most Ambitious, aka the longest book that I read this year. So there is no nominees for this one, it's just a winner, but we do have a couple of runners up just to kind of give you some more books to think about. But our actual winner is Heat of the Everflame by Penn Cole with 1,026 pages. It was a long one. That was a book that I do feel like, even though I was enjoying literally every second of it, I felt like I was reading that book for forever. This is actually the 3rd book in a series. The first book is called Spark of the Everflame, but I read them all on my Kindle, and I remember opening up that 3rd book and it said that it was going to take me like 20 hours or something crazy to finish. That was a very intimidating book to start. But a couple of runners up that we have is Pucking Around by Emily Rath. That one had 756 pages, which was a hockey Why Choose Romance. Really enjoyed it. I do feel like it was a little long for what it was, but I enjoyed it. And then we have Split and Swallow by Lindsay Straub, which is 750 pages. And Split and Swallow specifically had a very interesting concept, which I don't want to talk about because the main draw for that book for me was the fact that the synopsis, basically, it wasn't a synopsis. It was basically a note from the author saying that it's best, or that she's been told that it's best to just go in completely blind. So I'm gonna leave you completely blind. It was an interesting experience. Moving on to our next category, which is Biggest Flirt, and this is our shortest book of the year. And the winner of this one is Sweet Dark by Savannah Brown, which is a poetry book that unfortunately went like right over my head. I could not get into any of the poems in that. I didn't read it all the way through, to be honest, but I picked it up a few times and read a few poems, and I didn't connect with any of them. So it has a really cool cover though. And I actually did not write down the page number for that book, so let me look it up really quickly. 76 pages, so she is teeny tiny. Our second smallest book is Life of the Party by Olivia Atwater with 176 pages, so it has a whole nother 100 extra pages. That was another poetry book that I did actually read the majority of. It's got kind of like a heavier tone, and I was just kind of like reading it back to back to back, like I was reading a few every single day, and it was just getting a little much. So I took a little breather from that one, but I definitely am going to finish it. And then last but not least, for our shortest books, we have Barbarian Mine, which is the fourth book in the Ice Planet Barbarians series by Ruby Dixon. And this one on Goodreads said that it had 182 pages, but with the new releases of the new covers, you also get bonus content. So technically, I think that book was like 300 and something pages, but the actual original story is 182, I guess. So it counts, but also maybe doesn't, I don't know. Moving on to our next award, we have the Underachiever Award, which the name of that feels kind of mean, but it's basically an author that didn't work for me. So it's not like they're actually underachievers. I am by no means actually saying that. It's just a fun little name, but it's basically an author that I read this year that I probably won't read from again. And this one I do only have a couple because, I don't know, even if a book doesn't really work for me, I'm still most likely going to be open to reading more from them to like try it out again. But these two authors, I probably won't. And the first one, we already talked about them, is H.D. Carlton, which is the author of Haunting and Hunting Adeline. I want to finish that series just because I've already gotten most of the way through it, but I don't really see myself ever picking up anything else from that author. And then our second one is Savannah Brown, who is the author of Sweet Dark. Again, I think specifically because the poems just went over my head. I wasn't really knowing what she was talking about. I didn't like resonate with any of them that I read. So I think because of that, I probably won't read anything else from her. She does have some actual just like fiction books that aren't poetry. It's actually like a story. And I was actually going to read that as well at some point. Like I have it on my wish list, but I think I'm going to take it off just because, again, I don't know if her writing works for me. I might still read it. I don't know. Like that one's still a toss up. So that being said, our actual winner for our Underachiever Award is H.D. Carlton, because I pretty much like 99.9% sure I won't be reading anything else from her. Whereas Savannah Brown, I'm more of like 90% sure. On the flip side of that, our next award is the Best Storyteller Award, which is an author that I loved this year, like my favorite author of the year. And this one, honestly, this was again another one that was really hard for me to narrow down. I literally have, how many? 2, 4, 6, 8. I have 8 authors listed and then a 9th one that just says etc, etc. I can genuinely say I enjoyed like 90% of the books that I read this year, and it's all from authors that I would definitely for sure read again. So this was really hard for me. Just to kind of like list them really rapid fire, we have Lana Ferguson, Ruby Dixon, Shelby Maharan, Allie Hazelwood, Bryn Weaver, Penn Cole, Jennifer L. Armentrout, which is the only one on this list that I didn't mention a book from. And that's just because I've only read the first couple of books in one series, but I have other ones, and she's definitely becoming an author that I can tell will be a favorite, so I wanted to add her. And then last but not least, we have Elizabeth Helen, who wrote The Beast of the Briar. And the winner for the Best Storyteller ended up being Lana Ferguson. I feel like she needs a little bit more hype. I never really hear anybody talk about her books, but the couple of romances that I've read from her, I really enjoyed. Moving on to our second to last award, we have Best All Around, which is my favorite book of the entire year of 2024, which this one was also insanely hard to pin down. And honestly, I have a winner, but basically all of the nominees and a couple other ones that I've mentioned before, like Long Live Evil is not on this list just because I mentioned it already a couple other times. Anyway, that being said, the nominees for Best All Around are Beast of the Briar series by Elizabeth Helen, and then we also have Quicksilver by Callie Hart. This one definitely deserves every second of hype it gets. I went into this very cautious, thinking like there's no way it was gonna live up to the hype. It did, in my opinion. And then we have Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. We briefly kind of skimmed over this one with our most ambitious, our longest book of the year, but it's basically a fantasy romance with literally the slowest slow burn on the planet. It's honestly one of the reasons why I really liked it. There are certain circumstances where a slow burn kind of annoys me, but there's others where I really appreciate it. And in this series, I really appreciated it because there's just so many other things going on. Like the focus is not the romance, it's everything else. And the romance is just kind of like an extra little bonus. You get little breadcrumbs every once in a while and it's just, it makes it just so much better. So anyway, that's another one that's really hard for me to explain the plot of because one, I've read the entire series so far, so the storyline, I don't know what happened in what book, but also again, it was just so much went on in that series, but it is really, really good. And then our last nominee for Best All Around is Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. This one is a spicy romance between a phantom and a necromancer. Never read a book about either of those two types of creatures, but also we did have a competition involved, and that is my favorite freaking thing. Basically, we have our necromancer as the female character. She goes into Phantasma, which is a competition that's like run by devils, and the entire competition is inspired by the 9 Rings of Hell. It was such a fun, interesting concept, and I had a really good time reading it. There's our nominees, and our winner for Best All Around, Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. They're all winners in my eyes, truly, so it was really hard to like pick one, but I think this one just, I think the world in general was the most advanced. There was the most kind of going on in it, so that's why that one wins. And then our very last award for 2024 is Most Likely to Succeed, which is a book that I'm excited for 2025. Like the one that I think is really gonna hit. And I do have a few, but I've actually changed my mind. I was originally gonna give you 5, but I'm gonna do a whole video on my top 25 for 2025, and I don't wanna give away like a big chunk of that list. So I'm just gonna say the one that I really, without a shadow of a doubt, know I'm gonna love because I've literally loved everything else from this author, and that is Made for Each Other by Lynn Painter. This one is a romance that I think involves a maid based off the title. I haven't really read about it, and Lynn Painter is one of those authors that I don't even need to. I don't need a synopsis, I don't need literally anything. Just give me the book. I know I'm gonna love it. And with that, those are all of our 2024 book awards, our end of the year tag. Literally so much fun planning out this video and filming, so I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Let me know in the comments down below your answers for any of these questions, your favorite, your least favorite, your underdog, your overachiever, your best of the year. Let me know what your winners are for the year. And yeah, with that, that is everything that I have to say. I hope you guys have had the most amazing of days, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye!